AM Burrage, An Introduction, Volume 1. Alfred McLelland Burrage was born in Hillingdon, Middlesex, on 1st of July 1889. His father and uncle were both writers, primarily of boys' fiction, and by age 16, AM Burrage had joined them. The young man had ambitions to write for the adult market too. The money was better, and so was his writing. From 1890 to 1914, prior to the mainstream appeal of cinema and radio, the printed word, mainly in magazines, was the foremost mass entertainment. AM Burrage quickly became a master of the market, publishing his stories regularly across a number of publications. By the start of the Great War, Burrage was well established. But in 1916 he was conscripted to fight on the Western Front. He continued to write during these years, documenting his experiences in the classic book War is War by ex-Private X. For the remainder of his life, Burrage was rarely printed in book form, but continued to write and be published on a prodigious scale in magazines and newspapers. In this volume we concentrate on his supernatural stories, which are, by common consent, some of the best ever written. Succinct, yet full of character, each reveals a twist and a flavour that is unsettling, sometimes menacing, always disturbing.
The Waxworks by AM Burrage. "There's nothing new in your request," said the manager. "In fact, we refuse it to different people about 3 times a week. We've nothing to gain and something to lose by letting people spend the night in our murderer's den. If I allowed it and some young idiot lost his senses, what would be my position? But your being a journalist somewhat alters this case." Hewson smiled. "I suppose you mean that journalists have no senses to lose?" "Oh, no," laughed the manager. "But here we do have something to gain, publicity and advertisement. What is your paper, Mr. Hewson?" "I'm freelancing at present," Hewson confessed, "working on space for several papers. However, I should find no difficulty in getting the story printed. The Morning Echo would use it like a shot. A night with mariners' murderers." The manager nodded. "Very well, Mr. Hewson," he said. "Get your story printed in the Morning Echo and there'll be a £5 note waiting for you here. But it's no small ordeal that you're proposing to undertake. I own I shouldn't care to take it on. I've seen those figures dressed and undressed. I know all about the process of their manufacture, but I should hate having to sleep down there among them." "Why?" asked Hewson. "I don't know. There isn't any reason. It's just that I couldn't sit alone among them all night, with their seeming to stare at me in the way they do. If you're susceptible to atmosphere, I warn you that you're in for a very uncomfortable night." "You're not superstitious?" said the manager. "Not a bit," Hewson laughed. "But you're a journalist. You must have a strong imagination." "News editors have always complained that I haven't any. Plain facts are not considered sufficient in our trade, and the papers don't like offering their readers unbuttered bread." The manager smiled and rose. "Right," he said. "I think the last of the people have gone. I'll give orders for the figures downstairs not to be draped, and let the night people know that you'll be here. Then I'll take you down and show you round." He picked up the receiver of a house telephone, spoke into it, and presently replaced it. "One condition I'm afraid I must impose on you," he remarked. "I must ask you not to smoke. We had a fire scare down in the murderer's den this evening. I don't know who gave the alarm, but whosoever it was a false one. Fortunately, there were very few people down there at the time, or there might have been a panic. If you're ready, we'll make a move." Hewson followed the manager through 6 rooms. The manager stopped once and spoke to a man in uniform, saying something about an armchair in the murderer's den. "It's the best we can do for you, I'm afraid," he said to Hewson. "I hope you'll be able to get some sleep." He led the way through an open barrier and down ill-lit stone stairs, which conveyed a sinister impression of giving access to a dungeon. In a passage at the bottom were a few preliminary horrors, such as relics of the Inquisition, a rack taken from a medieval castle, branding irons, thumbscrews, and other mementos of man's cruelty to man. Beyond the passage was the murderer's den. It was a room of irregular shape with a vaulted roof and dimly lit by electric lights burning behind inverted bowls of frosted glass. It was, by design, an eerie and uncomfortable chamber, a chamber whose atmosphere invited its visitors to speak in whispers. The waxwork murderers stood on low pedestals with numbered tickets at their feet. Seeing them elsewhere, and without knowing whom they represented, one would have thought them a dull-looking crew, chiefly remarkable for the shabbiness of their clothes. The manager, walking around with Hewson, pointed out several of the more interesting of these unholy notabilities. "That's Crippen. I expect you recognise him. Insignificant little beast who looks as if he couldn't tread on a worm. That's Armstrong. Looks like a decent, harmless country gentleman, doesn't he? And of course this—"
"Who's that?" Hewson interrupted.
"Oh, I was coming to him," said the manager. "Come and have a good look at him. This is our star turn. He's the only one of the bunch that hasn't been hanged." The figure was of a small, slight man, not much more than 5 feet in height. It wore little waxed moustaches, large spectacles, and a caped coat. There was something so exaggeratedly French in its appearance that it reminded Hewson of a stage caricature. He could not have said precisely why the mild-looking face seemed to him so repellent, but he had already recoiled a step, and, even in the manager's company, it cost him an effort to look again.